Hi, I'm Natalie. My sister Vanessa took the proudest moment of my naval career and twisted it into a weapon to destroy me. She stole my Navy Achievement Medal ceremony photo and turned it into a viral joke that nearly cost me everything I'd worked for. What she didn't expect was that my husband, Commander Ryan Brooks, doesn't just serve our country, he protects his family with the same precision. By the time he was done, she learned that some battles you simply cannot win. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The salty Virginia Beach air hit my face as I stepped out of the Uber at Norfolk Naval Station, my dress whites crisp against the humid August morning. Today was supposed to be perfect. After 18 months deployed in the Mediterranean, I was finally receiving my Navy Achievement Medal for intelligence work that I couldn't even tell my own family about. The ceremony would be small, intimate, just the way I preferred it. Ryan stood waiting by the security checkpoint, looking impossibly handsome in his commander dress blues, that familiar proud smile spreading across his face when he spotted me. 3 hours later, I held that medal in my trembling hands as Admiral Thompson's words echoed across the base courtyard. The photographer captured the moment perfectly. Me standing at attention, Ryan beside me beaming with pride, the medal catching the morning sunlight. It was the culmination of 6 years of service, countless nights away from home, and sacrifices most people couldn't imagine. For once, I felt genuinely proud of myself without waiting for anyone else's approval. The trouble started at dinner that weekend. Ryan and I had driven the 2 hours to Richmond to celebrate with my family, carrying a printed copy of the ceremony photo along with the medal itself. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast. The dining room table was set with the good china, and Dad had even worn his button-down shirt instead of his usual weekend flannel. Vanessa arrived fashionably late, as always, sweeping in with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer sundress that probably cost more than my monthly base housing allowance. She kissed Mom's cheek with theatrical affection and settled into her usual spot across from me, immediately launching into stories about her latest influencer collaboration. Vanessa had somehow turned posting lifestyle content into a career that funded her downtown Richmond apartment and frequent shopping sprees. Her Instagram account boasted 40,000 followers who hung on her every carefully curated post about wellness, fashion, and living your best life. When I finally had a moment to share my news, sliding the photograph across the table with quiet pride, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Dad picked up the image, studying it with the serious expression he reserved for important documents. Mom leaned over his shoulder, making appropriate, appreciative sounds, but I could sense the energy shifting in ways I recognized from childhood. Vanessa glanced at the photo for exactly 3 seconds before laughing. Not a congratulatory laugh, or even a surprised one, but the kind of sharp, dismissive sound she used to make when I showed her my honor roll certificates in high school. She took a delicate sip of her wine and tilted her head with mock concern. Actually, Nat, you might want to be careful posting military stuff online. Some of my followers were asking about your whole Navy thing after I mentioned you last month. They thought it was kind of intense for a girl. You know how people can be about women trying to prove themselves in men's jobs. The words hit like a physical slap. Ryan's jaw tightened beside me, and I felt his hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently in that way that meant he was fighting every instinct to speak up. But this was my family, my battle to fight, and he knew it. I kept my voice steady and professional, the way I'd learned to do when dealing with difficult situations overseas. This isn't about proving anything, Vanessa. It's about serving my country and being recognized for doing my job well. She waved her manicured hand dismissively, as if my words were smoke she could clear from the air. Oh, I know you take it seriously. Maybe too seriously. I just think you could be doing so much more with your life, instead of playing soldier. Playing soldier. The phrase echoed in my head as Mom quickly changed the subject to Vanessa's upcoming brand partnership with a wellness company. Dad nodded along enthusiastically, asking thoughtful questions about her business strategy while my medals sat forgotten on the table beside my untouched pot roast. Ryan and I left earlier than planned, making polite excuses about the drive back to Virginia Beach. As we pulled out of my parents' driveway, I stared back at the house where I'd grown up, wondering when I'd become a stranger in my own family story. The Monday morning after our Richmond visit, I was deep in intelligence briefings at Norfolk when my phone started buzzing with notifications I couldn't immediately check. By lunch, the vibrations had become so constant that I finally stepped out of the secure area to see what was happening. My Instagram account, which I rarely used, had exploded with activity. Hundreds of new followers, dozens of comments, and a stream of direct messages that made my stomach drop as I scrolled through them. Someone had shared content featuring me, and the responses ranged from supportive to cruel to downright disturbing. It took me several minutes of scrolling to find the source. Vanessa had posted a video to her story that morning, one of those casual talking-to-camera clips she was famous for. She was sitting in her perfectly arranged living room holding my ceremony photograph like a prop. "So my little sister thinks she's some kind of war hero now," she said with that practiced laugh that sounded spontaneous but was actually carefully calibrated for maximum engagement. "Look at this precious little ceremony they had for her." She held the photo closer to the camera, and I watched in horror as she zoomed in on my face with exaggerated surprise. "I mean, she looks so serious, doesn't she? Like she's about to single-handedly win World War III. The comments are already pouring in from you guys asking if this is real or if it's some kind of costume party." My hands were shaking as I watched her continue, describing my military service like it was an elaborate game of dress-up, questioning whether I'd actually done anything worthy of recognition, and suggesting that maybe I was just trying to get attention since I couldn't compete with her success in the real world. She ended the video with a call to action that made my blood run cold. "What do you guys think? Should I be worried about my sister's military fantasy? Or is this just her way of finding her place?" Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow for more real talk about family drama. The comments were brutal. Her followers had latched onto her narrative and run with it, dissecting everything from my appearance to my worthiness to wear the uniform. Someone had screenshot the photo and posted it to Reddit with the caption, "Stolen valor or just trying too hard." Another person had created a meme using my ceremony photo, adding text that read, "When you need attention but have no actual personality." I sat in my car in the base parking lot, reading comment after comment that reduced 6 years of my life to a punchline. People who had never served, never sacrificed, never even left their hometown, were debating whether I deserved to wear my uniform. Strangers were analyzing my facial expression, my posture, even the way Ryan stood beside me, looking for evidence that the whole thing was somehow fake or undeserved. But what hurt more than the strangers' opinions was the silence from my own family. The video had been up for 6 hours. My parents followed Vanessa's social media accounts religiously, commenting supportive messages on every post she made about her morning smoothie or favorite lipstick. Today, nothing. I called Ryan from the parking lot, my voice barely steady enough to explain what was happening. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did when I needed to process something difficult. When I finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "Nat, I need you to screenshot everything. Every comment, every share, every reaction. Save it all before she deletes anything or tries to backtrack. What she's done isn't just hurtful. It could be considered harassment of military personnel, and there are regulations about that." I had never heard his voice carry that particular edge before. Ryan was methodical and careful, someone who thought 3 steps ahead and never acted on emotion alone. If he was talking about regulations and documentation, it meant he was already planning something that went far beyond a simple family confrontation. Over the next 2 days, Vanessa's video continued to circulate. She had pinned it to the top of her Instagram story, ensuring maximum visibility, and had even created a follow-up post asking her followers to share their own thoughts about military recognition ceremonies.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The engagement was incredible from a social media perspective, her best performing content in months. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the fallout at work. Several colleagues had seen the video or heard about it from others who followed Vanessa's account. Most were supportive, expressing outrage on my behalf and offering to help however they could. But a few seemed awkward around me, as if they were wondering whether there might be some truth to Vanessa's implications. Sergeant Martinez from the base legal office sought me out Thursday afternoon, finding me in the commissary during my lunch break. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had zero tolerance for anything that undermined military personnel. "Petty Officer Brooks," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "I saw what your sister posted. Has anyone from your chain of command discussed this with you yet?" I shook my head, suddenly worried that I was in some kind of trouble I hadn't anticipated. Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious but not unsympathetic. "What she's done could constitute cyber harassment of a service member, especially since she's using your official military imagery to generate social media engagement without your consent. There are several regulations that protect against this kind of exploitation, and frankly, some of her followers' comments crossed the line into threats against military personnel." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots she had already collected. Someone had posted my ceremony photo with the caption, "Target practice anyone?" Another had suggested that fake soldiers like this deserved to be taught a lesson about real sacrifice. A third had shared my photo alongside images of other service members, ranking us by who looked most likely to quote, 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 quote. Martinez continued scrolling through evidence I hadn't even seen yet. "Your sister's response to some of these comments is particularly problematic. Look at this exchange." She showed me a conversation where one of Vanessa's followers had written, "Military girls are just men with daddy issues trying to prove something." Instead of moderating the comment or defending me, Vanessa had replied with laughing emojis and the words, "You're not wrong. Some people need more attention than others." The documentation Martinez had compiled was extensive and damning. She had traced the spread of my photo across multiple platforms, cataloged the most threatening comments, and even identified several fake accounts that seemed to exist solely to harass military personnel. What had started as my sister's casual cruelty had evolved into something much more serious. "If you want to pursue this officially," Martinez said, "we have grounds for several different approaches. Cyber harassment, unauthorized use of military imagery for commercial purposes, and potentially inciting harassment against service personnel. Your sister's account is monetized, which means she's profiting from content that's generating threats against an active-duty service member." I stared at the evidence spread across her phone screen, feeling a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. Part of me wanted to pursue every legal avenue available, to make Vanessa face real consequences for what she had done. But another part of me just wanted the whole situation to disappear, to go back to the quiet pride I had felt standing in that ceremony receiving my medal. Ryan found me that evening sitting on our apartment balcony, staring out at the Atlantic Ocean as the sun set behind the naval base. He had stopped at the commissary on his way home and brought takeout from the Thai place we both loved, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. He settled into the chair beside me and waited, understanding that sometimes I needed time to find the right words for complicated emotions. Finally, I told him about Martinez's visit, about the legal options, about the decision I was struggling to make. "She's my sister," I said finally. "I know she's selfish and cruel sometimes, but pursuing this officially feels like declaring war on my own family. What if I'm just being too sensitive? What if she really was just trying to be funny, and it got out of hand?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights begin to twinkle across the base as evening settled over Virginia Beach. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the calm authority that made him such an effective leader. "Natalie, in 6 years of marriage, I have watched you handle deployment separations, classified stress, and situations that would break most people. You are the furthest thing from oversensitive that exists. What your sister did was calculated, cruel, and designed specifically to undermine your achievements and your service." He turned to face me directly, his expression more serious than I had seen it in months. "But more importantly, this isn't just about hurt feelings anymore. Those comments Martinez showed you represent a real security risk. There are people now who view you as a target, who have your photo and your general location and consider you a legitimate enemy. That's not family drama. That's a threat to operational security." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a new Instagram notification. Vanessa had posted another video, this one titled, "Military Family Drama Update." The preview image showed her holding what looked like a printed news article, her expression conveying the kind of concerned disappointment she had perfected over years of social media performance. I almost didn't watch it. Every instinct told me that engaging with whatever new narrative she was crafting would only make the situation worse. But Ryan gently took the phone from my hands and pressed play, his expression growing darker with each passing second. "So some of you have been asking for an update on my sister's military situation," Vanessa began, settling into her preferred talking head position with perfect lighting and carefully arranged background props. "I have to say, I'm a little concerned about how far she's taking this whole thing." She held up what appeared to be a printed screenshot of a news article about military social media guidelines, though the headline was partially obscured by her thumb. Apparently, she's now claiming that sharing family photos is somehow illegal or harassment. Like, I literally just shared a picture of my own sister at a family celebration, and now she's talking about pressing charges. The video continued for another 3 minutes, during which Vanessa painted herself as a confused and concerned family member who was just trying to support her sister's interests but was now being threatened with legal action for innocuous social media posts. She managed to make herself sound both hurt and bewildered, as if my reaction was completely disproportionate to her harmless family sharing. But the most damaging part came near the end, when she addressed the camera with her most serious, concerned expression. "Look, I love my sister, and I support her choices, even when I don't understand them. But I'm starting to worry that military life might not be the best fit for someone who can't handle gentle family teasing. If she's this upset about a simple Instagram story, how is she supposed to handle actual combat situations or real pressure?" She ended with her signature call to action, asking her followers to share their thoughts about military readiness and family dynamics, but this time there was something more calculated in her approach. She was no longer just making fun of my ceremony photo. She was questioning my fundamental fitness for military service, and she was doing it in front of 40,000 people who trusted her judgment. Ryan and I sat in silence as the video ended, the weight of her escalation settling between us like a physical presence. What had started as sibling cruelty had evolved into a deliberate campaign to undermine my career and my reputation. Vanessa wasn't just being thoughtlessly mean anymore. She was weaponizing her platform against me with increasing sophistication. The comments on the new video were even worse than before. Her followers had embraced her narrative about military readiness and family loyalty, with dozens of people agreeing that someone who couldn't handle social media criticism probably shouldn't be trusted with national security responsibilities. Several comments suggested that I was exactly the kind of weak link that made military units less effective. Ryan finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a calm finality that I recognized from his most serious command decisions. "She just made this easy for me," he said, already reaching for his laptop. "What she's doing now goes beyond harassment. She's actively working to damage your career and your security clearance. That's not family drama anymore. That's an attack on a service member. And there are people specifically trained to handle attacks on service members." I watched him open his computer and begin typing with the focused intensity he brought to operational planning. He was no longer just my husband trying to protect his wife's feelings. He was a naval commander dealing with a threat to one of his fellow officers. Martinez had given me her card with instructions to call if the situation escalated. As Ryan continued typing what looked like a formal incident report, I realized that Vanessa had just crossed a line she didn't even know existed. She had been playing a social media game while we were operating under military protocols, and she was about to discover that those were two very different sets of rules. The late August heat hung heavy over Virginia Beach as I prepared for what would become the longest week of my naval career. Ryan had spent the weekend documenting everything Vanessa had posted, creating a comprehensive timeline that read like a military intelligence brief. Every screenshot was timestamped, every comment thread was cataloged, and every escalation was noted with the kind of precision that made him exceptional at his job. Monday morning, I sat across from Martinez in the base legal office, watching her review Ryan's documentation with the focused attention of someone accustomed to building cases that mattered. She had added her own research to his work, including analysis of the engagement patterns on Vanessa's posts and identification of several concerning followers who seemed to have specific interest in targeting military personnel. "The legal framework is clear," Martinez said. looking up from the thick folder that now contained my sister's social media campaign against me. Unauthorized use of military imagery for commercial gain, cyber harassment of service personnel, and incitement of threats against a service member. Your sister's account generates income through sponsorships and partnerships, which means every post featuring your photo and uniform has commercial value that she's deriving without permission. But there was something else Martinez had discovered that neither Ryan nor I had anticipated. Vanessa's recent posts about military readiness and family dynamics had been shared in several online communities dedicated to criticizing military spending and questioning the value of modern military service. Her content was being used as evidence in discussions about whether certain people should be allowed to serve, with my ceremony photo appearing as a symbol of everything these groups believed was wrong with current military standards. She's not just attacking you personally anymore, Martinez continued. She's inadvertently providing propaganda material for groups that actively work to undermine military recruitment and retention. Your image and her narrative about military readiness are being used in contexts she probably never intended, but the effect is the same. The scope of what my sister had unleashed was staggering. What had started as family cruelty had spiraled into something that threatened not just my own career but potentially influenced public perception of military service more broadly. Martinez showed me forums where my photo was being used alongside other images to support arguments that military standards had declined, that recognition ceremonies were meaningless participation trophies, and that people like me represented everything wrong with modern defense policy. I left Martinez's office that afternoon with a formal complaint filed and a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. The situation was now officially beyond family drama. It was a military matter being handled through proper channels. But I also knew that once these wheels started turning, there would be no going back to simple sibling rivalry. Ryan was waiting for me when I got home, along with someone I hadn't expected to see. Uncle Tommy sat at our kitchen table, still wearing his Veterans Affairs polo shirt, and looking more serious than I had seen him since my grandfather's funeral. He stood when I entered, pulling me into one of his bear hugs that always smelled like coffee and Old Spice. Tommy had served 2 tours in Vietnam and understood military culture in ways that my parents never had. When I decided to enlist, he had been the only family member who truly understood what that meant, who asked meaningful questions about my training and genuinely celebrated my achievements. He was also the only person in my family who had never seemed impressed by Vanessa's social media success. "I saw what she posted," he said without preamble. "Ryan called me this afternoon and filled me in on what you're dealing with. I want you to know that what she's doing isn't just wrong. It's dangerous. And it needs to stop." He had brought his laptop and spent the next hour showing me something I hadn't realized was happening. Tommy had been quietly monitoring military-related social media discussions for months, as part of his volunteer work with veteran support organizations. He had watched my ceremony photos spread through networks I never knew existed, seeing it appear in contexts that had nothing to do with Vanessa's original post. "Your picture showed up in a discussion forum for people who think military women are just trying to take jobs away from men," he said, pointing to a thread where my image had been posted alongside disparaging comments about female service members. "It's also being used in groups that claim modern military recognition is too easy, that people are getting medals for things that shouldn't count as real achievement." The breadth of the damage was overwhelming. My sister's casual cruelty had metastasized into something that affected not just me, but potentially other service members, who were being judged by standards influenced by her narrative. Women in particular were facing increased scrutiny in online military discussions, with my ceremony photo often cited as evidence that recognition standards had become too lenient. Tommy closed his laptop and looked directly at me with the kind of serious expression he reserved for the most important conversations. "Natalie, in Vietnam we had rules about how you handled people who threatened the safety and security of your unit. Those rules existed because some threats can't be ignored or negotiated with. They have to be neutralized completely before they do more damage." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What your sister is doing threatens more than just your feelings or your career. It's threatening the respect and recognition that all service members depend on to do their jobs effectively. Sometimes protecting your unit means taking decisive action against threats, even when those threats come from unexpected places." That evening, as Ryan and I sat on our balcony watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and orange, I felt something shift inside me. For weeks I had been thinking about this situation in terms of family dynamics and personal hurt. But Tommy's visit had helped me see it differently. This wasn't just about my relationship with Vanessa anymore. It was about protecting something larger than myself. Ryan had been unusually quiet during Tommy's visit, listening intently but contributing little to the conversation. Now, as we sat together in the evening calm, he finally spoke. I'd been thinking about what Tommy said, about neutralizing threats to the unit. In the Navy, we have specific protocols for dealing with security risks, and we follow those protocols regardless of where the threats originate. He turned to face me, his expression carrying the kind of calm determination I had learned to recognize as his most dangerous mood. Your sister doesn't understand military culture, military law, or military consequences. She's been operating in civilian social media space, playing by civilian rules, but she's attacking military personnel, using military imagery for commercial purposes, which means she's now subject to military justice protocols whether she realizes it or not. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest as I began to understand what he was suggesting. Ryan wasn't just talking about filing complaints or seeking mediation through family channels. He was talking about treating Vanessa's actions as what they legally were, an attack on military personnel and resources that demanded an appropriate military response. What exactly does an appropriate military response look like? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Ryan smiled for the first time in days, but it wasn't the warm expression I was used to. It was something colder, more calculated. The kind of smile that appeared when he was planning operations that would achieve maximum effectiveness with minimal waste. Tomorrow, we start documenting everything she's ever posted about military personnel. Not just you. We build a comprehensive case showing pattern and intent. We identify every commercial partnership she has, every sponsor she works with, every platform she uses to generate income. He paused, watching a naval vessel move slowly across the horizon. And then we let her discover that there are consequences for attacking the United States Navy that go far beyond family disapproval. She wants to play games with military images and military personnel. She's about to learn that the military plays games differently than civilians do. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a notification from Vanessa's Instagram account. She had posted a new video, this one titled, Military Family Update, Setting Boundaries with Dramatic Siblings. I handed the phone to Ryan without watching the video. Whatever new escalation she was attempting, whatever fresh humiliation she was planning, it no longer mattered in the way it had before. She had made this into something bigger than family dynamics, and now she would face something bigger than family consequences. Ryan watched the video with the same analytical expression he brought to intelligence briefings, occasionally pausing to screenshot particular moments or comments. When it ended, he set the phone down and looked out at the darkening ocean. She just made our job easier, he said quietly. In this video, she's explicitly claiming that her posts about you were designed to teach you a lesson about handling criticism. That's admission of intent to harass a service member. Tomorrow, Martinez is going to be very interested in this particular piece of evidence. The lights of Norfolk Naval Base twinkled in the distance as evening settled over Virginia Beach. Somewhere in Richmond, my sister was probably monitoring the engagement on her latest video, pleased with the response from her followers and confident that she was winning whatever game she thought we were playing. She had no idea that the game had just changed completely, or that she was about to face an opponent who had been trained to win conflicts that actually mattered. Ryan and I sat together in comfortable silence, watching the steady rhythm of military operations continue across the water, and I felt something that had been missing for weeks finally return. For the first time since this all started, I wasn't afraid of what my sister might do next. Instead, I was curious to see what she would do when she realized she had declared war on the wrong family. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made Virginia Beach feel like breathing through wet cotton. I woke before my alarm, the weight of impending confrontations settling in my chest like a stone. Ryan was already gone, having left at 0500 for an emergency briefing that he couldn't discuss but that had left him wearing the expression he reserved for serious operational matters. The base felt different that morning as I made my way to Martinez's office. Personnel moved with the same efficient purpose as always, but I found myself noticing details I usually overlooked. The way security guards examined identification with extra attention, the careful positioning of surveillance equipment, the subtle but unmistakable presence of military police in areas where they weren't typically stationed. It was as if the entire installation had shifted into a heightened state of awareness, though I couldn't tell if that was reality or my own paranoia. Martinez's office door was open, but she wasn't alone. Commander Patricia Hendricks, from Naval Criminal Investigative Service, sat across from Martinez's desk, her severe gray suit and perfectly arranged silver hair, making her look like someone accustomed to handling situations that required absolute discretion and maximum consequences. She stood when I entered, extending a firm handshake and introducing herself with the kind of professional courtesy that somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. "Petty Officer Brooks," Commander Hendricks said, settling back into her chair as I took the remaining seat, "Sergeant Martinez has briefed me on your situation, and I've reviewed the documentation your husband compiled. What began as a family dispute has evolved into something that requires our attention from a national security perspective." She opened a tablet and showed me images I recognized but had never seen compiled in such a systematic way. Screenshots of Vanessa's posts arranged chronologically, showing the clear escalation from casual mockery to deliberate undermining. Comments from her followers that had grown increasingly hostile and specific in their threats. Most disturbing of all, evidence that my ceremony photo was now being used in anti-military propaganda on platforms I had never heard of. "The scope of viral spread on military-themed content is something we monitor closely," Commander Hendricks continued. "Your sister's initial posts may have seemed like harmless social media content, but they've been amplified by networks specifically designed to undermine public confidence in military service. Whether she intended this outcome or not, she's now a contributing factor in organized disinformation campaigns." Martinez leaned forward, her expression carrying the kind of focused intensity that made her legendary among junior enlisted personnel who needed someone to fight for them. "What makes this particularly serious is the commercial aspect. Your sister's account generates revenue through sponsorship deals and affiliate marketing. Every post that features your image or military service generates income for her, which legally constitutes unauthorized commercial use of military imagery and personnel likeness." Commander Hendricks nodded, pulling up another screen that showed financial data I didn't understand but that clearly concerned her. "We've traced approximately $43,000 in revenue, directly attributable to content featuring your image or military service over the past 6 weeks. That's not family teasing or sibling rivalry. That's commercial exploitation of military personnel for profit, and it falls under several federal statutes designed to protect service members from exactly this type of exploitation." The numbers were staggering. While I had been struggling with hurt feelings and family dynamics, my sister had been building a profitable content strategy around my humiliation. Her most successful posts were those that featured my ceremony photo or discussed my military service, generating engagement rates that translated directly into sponsorship value and affiliate commission. But the financial exploitation was only part of the problem. Commander Hendricks showed me evidence that concerned her more than the money. Several of Vanessa's followers had used information from her posts to attempt to identify my duty station, my security clearance level, and my deployment history. 3 different social media accounts had posted what appeared to be my base housing address, along with suggestions about how to, quote, teach military brats about real consequences. This crosses the line from harassment into potential threats against a service member with access to classified information, Commander Hendricks said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen these situations escalate into genuine security breaches. "Your sister may not have intended to compromise operational security, but intent doesn't matter when the result is classified personnel being targeted by hostile actors." Martinez pulled out a thick folder containing printed copies of everything they had compiled. "We have 3 options for how to proceed," she said. "We can handle this administratively through military justice protocols, which would result in formal charges but might take months to resolve. We can coordinate with civilian law enforcement for federal prosecution under commercial exploitation and cyberstalking statutes. Or we can implement what we call a strategic response. I had never heard the term strategic response in this context, and something in Martinez's tone suggested it wasn't standard legal terminology. Commander Hendricks answered the question I hadn't asked yet. A strategic response involves using military resources and protocols to address civilian threats in ways that demonstrate the serious nature of attacking military personnel, while operating within legal frameworks that civilians often don't understand exist. She paused, studying my reaction carefully. Your sister has been playing games with military imagery and personnel while assuming that civilian social media rules apply to her actions. A strategic response would involve showing her that there are military consequences for military-related violations, regardless of where those violations originate. The meeting lasted another hour, during which they outlined a plan that was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. Instead of pursuing lengthy civilian court proceedings or administrative military justice processes, they would document every aspect of Vanessa's commercial exploitation of military imagery and personnel. Then they would present evidence of federal violations to every sponsor, platform, and partner she worked with, along with formal notices that continuing business relationships with her would constitute potential participation in criminal activity. But the most effective element of their strategic response involved something I hadn't expected. Commander Hendricks had identified 3 major brands that were currently negotiating sponsorship deals with Vanessa, worth a combined total of over $200,000. Each of these companies had specific corporate policies against associating with content that exploited military personnel or contributed to anti-military sentiment. We inform them about her violations, provide them with comprehensive documentation, and let them make informed business decisions about whether they want to be associated with someone who profits from attacking active-duty service members, Commander Hendricks explained. No threats, no ultimatums, just information that allows them to protect their own interests and corporate reputations. The beauty of the approach was its complete adherence to legal and ethical guidelines, while being utterly devastating to Vanessa's livelihood. Unlike civilian harassment cases that might take years to resolve, corporate sponsors could terminate partnerships immediately upon learning about potential legal liabilities. An influencer who represented risk to corporate reputation was an influencer who would find herself unemployed very quickly. Martinez handed me a document that required my signature authorizing the investigation and response. The most important thing for you to understand, she said, is that once we implement this response, it will be thorough and it will be final. Your sister won't have opportunities to apologize or make amends or claim she didn't understand the consequences. She'll face the full weight of federal regulations designed to protect military personnel, and those regulations don't include provisions for family relationships or good intentions. I stared at the authorization form, thinking about the 6-year-old girl who used to follow me around our backyard, insisting that she could do everything I could do. The teenager who had borrowed my clothes without asking and never returned them. The young woman who had gradually transformed family gatherings into performances centered around her achievements and aspirations. But then I thought about the ceremony photo, about the pride I had felt standing at attention while Admiral Thompson pinned that medal to my uniform. About 18 months deployed in the Mediterranean, missing birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments with Ryan so that I could serve my country effectively. About the comments suggesting I was too weak for military service. About the threats against military personnel that had emerged from her casual cruelty. I signed the authorization form. Commander Hendricks smiled for the first time since I had met her, and it was the smile of someone who genuinely enjoyed solving problems that required precision and careful planning. Your sister should receive the first formal notifications sometime Friday morning, she said, gathering her materials with practiced efficiency. By Friday afternoon, she'll understand that attacking military personnel carries consequences she never anticipated. That afternoon, I drove back to our apartment feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The decision was made, the wheels were in motion, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I was responding rather than reacting. Vanessa had been fighting a social media war while I had been trying to preserve family relationships, but now she was about to discover that I hadn't been fighting at all. I had been gathering intelligence. Ryan was waiting for me with takeout from our favorite Vietnamese restaurant, and the kind of satisfied expression that meant his own mysterious morning briefing had gone well. We ate dinner on our balcony, watching the sun set over the Atlantic while I filled him in on the meeting with Martinez and Commander Hendricks. So they're going after her sponsors and partnerships, he said, finishing the last of his spring rolls with the methodical precision he brought to everything. That's actually more effective than criminal prosecution would have been. Criminal cases take years and might not result in meaningful consequences. But losing 6 figures in sponsorship income happens immediately and permanently. He was right, of course. Vanessa's entire lifestyle depended on maintaining her social media presence and the commercial relationships that came with it. Her downtown Richmond apartment, her designer clothes, her carefully curated wellness retreat vacations, all of it was funded by brands that paid her to represent their products to her 40,000 followers. Without those partnerships, she would be forced to find conventional employment for the first time since college. But there was something else Ryan wanted to discuss, something that explained his satisfied mood and his morning's mysterious briefing. The Norfolk base commander is implementing new security protocols for all personnel whose images have been used in unauthorized social media content, he said. Starting Monday, anyone who has been targeted for harassment or exploitation gets additional security clearance monitoring and enhanced operational security protections. I didn't immediately understand why this was significant until he explained further. It means your security clearance gets upgraded to a higher level, with access to more sensitive assignments and better career advancement opportunities. Essentially, your sister's attacks on your military service are going to result in the Navy investing more resources in your career development and giving you access to opportunities that typically take years to earn. The irony was perfect. While Vanessa had been working to undermine my military career, she had actually triggered security protocols that would enhance it. Her attempts to portray me as unfit for service had instead flagged me as someone who needed additional institutional protection and investment. That evening, as we sat together watching the steady flow of naval traffic across the horizon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Genuine peace. Not just the absence of anxiety, but actual contentment with the path forward. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow brought, but tonight I was exactly where I belonged. My phone buzzed with a notification from Vanessa's Instagram account. Another video, this one titled, "Family Drama Update, Why I'm Taking a Social Media Break." I showed the notification to Ryan, who laughed and shook his head. "Too late for strategic retreats," he said. The response is already in motion, and military operations don't pause for civilian second thoughts. I deleted the notification without watching the video. Whatever Vanessa was saying now, whatever narrative she was trying to construct, it no longer mattered. She had spent weeks teaching me that family relationships were negotiable and conditional. Now she was about to learn that military regulations were neither. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that made Virginia Beach look like a postcard. The humidity had broken overnight, leaving behind air that felt clean and full of possibility. I was reviewing intelligence reports in my office at Norfolk when Martinez called, her voice carrying barely contained satisfaction. "The first notifications went out an hour ago," she said. 3 major sponsors have already suspended their partnerships pending investigation, and 2 others have requested immediate legal consultations about their liability exposure. It was happening faster than anyone had anticipated. Corporate legal departments moved quickly when faced with potential federal violations, and the documentation Martinez and Commander Hendricks had compiled left little room for doubt about Vanessa's commercial exploitation of military imagery. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. One of Vanessa's sponsors, a wellness company that specialized in stress reduction products, had done their own investigation after receiving the formal notification. They had discovered that she was simultaneously promoting their relaxation supplements while posting content designed to cause psychological distress to military personnel, a combination that created obvious liability issues for a company marketing mental health products. Their legal department contacted Commander Hendricks directly, Martinez continued, requesting copies of all documentation so they could use her contract violations as grounds for demanding immediate repayment of all sponsorship fees paid over the past 6 months. That's approximately $38,000 that she'll have to return within 30 days. I set down the intelligence report I had been reviewing, suddenly unable to concentrate on routine threat assessments, when my sister was experiencing a much more immediate and personal threat assessment of her own. How is she handling it? I asked, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to know the answer. Martinez's tone shifted slightly, carrying a note of professional satisfaction mixed with something that might have been sympathy. According to social media monitoring, she's posted 17 Instagram stories since 9 this morning. Most of them involve crying. Some include accusations that someone is sabotaging her career, and the latest few suggest she's beginning to understand that this situation is more serious than she initially realized. Part of me felt sorry for her. Despite everything she had done, despite the calculated cruelty and commercial exploitation, she was still my sister, and I could imagine the panic she must be experiencing as her carefully constructed life began collapsing around her. But another part of me remembered the ceremony photo, remembered the comments about my fitness for service, remembered the threats that had emerged from her casual mockery. Military personnel face consequences every day for decisions that affect operational security and unit effectiveness, I told Martinez. Maybe it's time civilian family members learned that attacking military personnel also carries consequences. That afternoon, Uncle Tommy called while I was driving home from base. His voice carried the kind of grim satisfaction that came from watching justice served to people who had been protected from consequences for too long. "I just got off the phone with your mother," he said without preamble. "Vanessa showed up at their house this morning, crying and carrying a box of legal documents she doesn't understand. She's been trying to get them to call you, to arrange some kind of family meeting where everyone can work this out." I pulled into our apartment complex parking lot and sat in the car, letting the engine idle while I processed what he was telling me. "Your parents want to have a family dinner tomorrow night," Tommy continued. "They think this is still a family disagreement that can be solved with conversation and compromise. They don't understand that she crossed legal lines that can't be uncrossed by saying she's sorry." The idea of sitting around my parents' dining room table, pretending that Vanessa's commercial exploitation of my military service was just a misunderstanding that could be resolved with pot roast and good intentions, was almost surreal. My family still thought we were dealing with sibling rivalry when we were actually dealing with federal violations that had already triggered criminal investigations. "What did you tell them?" I asked. Tommy's laugh carried decades of experience dealing with family members who preferred comfortable illusions to difficult realities. "I told them that Natalie is handling this situation through appropriate channels, and that those channels don't include family dinners or emotional appeals. I also told them that if they wanted to help Vanessa, they should encourage her to hire a good attorney who specializes in federal commercial violations." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what was happening and why it mattered. "Your sister spent weeks learning that she could attack military personnel without consequences. Now she's learning that lesson was wrong, and the education is going to be expensive and permanent." That evening, Ryan and I sat on our balcony as we had so many times over the past few weeks, watching the sun set over the Atlantic and the steady movement of naval vessels across the horizon. But tonight felt different. Instead of the anxious uncertainty that had characterized our conversations lately, there was a sense of completion, as if a long and difficult operation was entering its final phase. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from Vanessa's social media accounts, but I had stopped checking them. Whatever panic or desperation she was broadcasting to her remaining followers was no longer my concern. She had taught me that family relationships were conditional and transactional. Now she was learning that some transactions carried interest rates she couldn't afford. Ryan was reviewing reports on his laptop, occasionally looking up to watch a particularly large vessel pass by our building. "Commander Hendricks called me this afternoon," he said, closing the laptop and giving me his full attention. "The base security review identified 14 other military personnel who have been targeted for similar harassment over the past year. Your case is being used as a template for protecting them and prosecuting their attackers." I thought about those 14 other service members, about ceremony photos stolen and twisted into weapons, about achievements mocked and service questioned by people who had never worn a uniform, or taken an oath, or missed a single family gathering for the sake of national security. So Vanessa helped expose a larger problem, I said. Ryan nodded, his expression carrying the kind of professional satisfaction that came from solving problems that protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Her commercial exploitation of your military service revealed systematic vulnerabilities in how we protect personnel from this type of attack. The protocols being implemented because of your case will probably prevent hundreds of similar situations over the next few years. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. Mom's contact information appeared on the screen, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that had characterized my relationship with my family for as long as I could remember. Ryan looked at the phone, then at me, waiting to see how I wanted to handle the call. I answered on the fourth ring. "Natalie, honey." Mom's voice carried the kind of forced cheerfulness she used when she wanted to pretend everything was normal. "We need to talk about this situation with Vanessa. She's very upset, and she says you're trying to have her arrested or something. This has gone too far." I looked out at the ocean, watching the lights of a naval vessel move steadily toward the horizon, and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for weeks. "Mom, Vanessa spent 6 weeks using my military service photos to generate income for herself while encouraging her followers to question my fitness for duty. She turned my Navy Achievement Medal ceremony into content that's now being used in anti-military propaganda. This isn't a family disagreement anymore. It's a federal investigation." There was silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that meant she was processing information that didn't fit into the narrative she had constructed about the situation. "But she's your sister," Mom said finally, her voice carrying the bewilderment of someone who had spent decades believing that family relationships existed outside the boundaries of law and consequence. "And I'm a United States Navy petty officer who swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution," I replied. "When she attacked my military service for profit, she attacked the institution I've sworn to serve. That makes this bigger than family." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which Mom alternated between pleading for family unity and expressing disbelief that legal consequences could result from social media posts. She seemed genuinely unable to understand that actions carried weight beyond their impact on family dynamics, that there were systems and institutions and responsibilities that existed outside the bubble of comfortable suburban assumptions. When I finally hung up, Ryan was watching me with the kind of careful attention he gave to situations that required precise navigation. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question seriously, taking inventory of the emotions that had been churning through me for weeks. The hurt was still there, but it felt different now, more like the dull ache of a healing wound than the sharp pain of fresh injury. The anger had transformed into something more useful, a clear-eyed understanding of boundaries and consequences, and the difference between family love and institutional respect. "I feel like I've been trying to solve the wrong problem," I said finally. "I've been trying to preserve family relationships with people who were willing to sacrifice my career and reputation for social media engagement. But the real problem was learning to value myself and my service enough to defend them properly." Ryan nodded, closing his laptop and settling back in his chair to watch the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. "Your sister's going to keep posting videos and trying to generate sympathy," he said. "Your parents are going to keep calling and asking you to make this go away. But none of that changes the fact that she committed federal violations and you responded appropriately through proper channels." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with another notification from Vanessa's Instagram account. This time, instead of deleting it immediately, I showed it to Ryan. The preview showed her sitting in what looked like our parents' living room, tears streaming down her face, holding what appeared to be legal documents. The caption read, "When your own family tries to destroy your life because they can't handle success." Ryan looked at the notification and laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I was used to. It was something colder, more calculating. "She still doesn't understand what happened," he said. "She thinks this is about jealousy or family competition. She has no idea she attacked a military installation and service member, and that military installations defend themselves differently than families do." The lights of Norfolk Naval Base twinkled in the distance, as full darkness settled over Virginia Beach. Somewhere in Richmond, my sister was probably recording more videos, trying to reconstruct a narrative that made her the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Somewhere else, corporate lawyers were reviewing contracts and calculating liability exposure, preparing to demonstrate that attacking military personnel was bad for business. And here, on our balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, I sat with my husband watching the steady rhythm of naval operations continue across the water, finally understanding that I had been defending the wrong things, in the wrong ways for far too long. The game had changed completely, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I was confident about the outcome. Saturday arrived with an unusual stillness that felt like the ocean holding its breath before a storm. I woke to find Ryan already dressed in civilian clothes, which was odd for a weekend morning when he typically lounged in his Navy PT gear until after coffee. His expression carried that particular focus that meant something significant was developing, though he hadn't shared any details yet. The silence was broken by my phone, ringing at exactly 0800 hours. Vanessa's contact information flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something about the precise timing made me curious enough to answer. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it before. Gone was the confident social media persona, replaced by something raw and desperate that made her sound younger than her 26 years. "Natalie, please, I need you to make this stop. I don't understand what's happening, but I've lost 3 major sponsorship deals since yesterday, and 2 companies are demanding money back that I don't have. Mom says you filed some kind of military complaint against me." I walked out onto the balcony, looking across the water toward Norfolk Naval Base, where Saturday morning operations continued with their usual efficiency regardless of family drama playing out in civilian apartments across the bay. "Vanessa, you spent 6 weeks using my military service to create content that generated income for you. You posted my ceremony photo without permission and encouraged your followers to question my fitness for duty. Those actions have consequences under federal law." There was a long pause, filled with the kind of breathing that suggested she was crying or trying not to cry. "But I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking with genuine distress. "I was just trying to be funny, to connect with my audience. I didn't know there were laws about posting family photos." "The thing about consequences is that they don't depend on your intentions," I replied, watching a training vessel move slowly across the horizon. "You profited from attacking a service member, and now you're facing the legal results of that choice." What followed was 20 minutes of alternating pleas and accusations, during which Vanessa cycled through every emotional manipulation technique she had perfected over the years. She was sorry but also justified. She was devastated but also angry. She wanted to make things right, but also wanted me to fix everything for her, without her having to accept responsibility for anything. The conversation ended when she demanded to know exactly what I had done to cause her business partnerships to collapse, as if I was responsible for corporate lawyers' decisions to distance their clients from potential federal violations. After I hung up, Ryan appeared on the balcony carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested he had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "How many more calls like that do you think you'll get today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Family dinner tonight at 6. Vanessa needs our support right now, and we need to work this out as a family." I showed the message to Ryan, who read it and shook his head with something between amusement and exasperation. "Your family still thinks this is a problem that can be solved with pot roast and good intentions," he said. "They don't understand that she violated federal statutes, not family etiquette." The idea of sitting around my parents' dining room table while Vanessa performed her victim routine and everyone pretended that legal consequences were optional felt exhausting in a way that 18-month deployments never had. But there was something else bothering me about Mom's text, something about the assumption that I would simply appear when summoned to clean up a mess I hadn't created. I typed back a response that felt both liberating and terrifying. "I won't be attending dinner tonight. Vanessa's legal situation is a result of her choices, and family meetings won't change federal law." The response came within minutes, a phone call rather than a text. Mom's voice carried the kind of sharp disappointment that had shaped my childhood, the tone that meant I was failing to meet expectations that had never been clearly explained. "Natalie Elizabeth Brooks, you get yourself to this dinner tonight. Your sister is in serious trouble, and this family sticks together when things get difficult." I found myself standing straighter, as if her voice through the phone could still trigger the automatic responses that had been trained into me over decades of family gatherings, where keeping peace was more important than addressing problems. "Mom, Vanessa used my military service to build her social media brand. She made money by mocking my achievements and encouraging strangers to question whether I deserve to wear my uniform. That's not a family disagreement, that's commercial exploitation of military personnel." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of information that didn't fit into Mom's understanding of how families were supposed to work. When she finally spoke, her voice carried bewilderment that was both genuine and frustrating. "But she's been so successful with her online business," Mom said. "She's built something really impressive, and now it's all falling apart because of some technicality about military photos." Technicality. As if federal laws protecting service members were bureaucratic footnotes, rather than essential safeguards developed through decades of experience with threats against military personnel. "It's not a technicality, Mom. She committed federal violations. And she's facing the consequences of those violations. The fact that she's family doesn't make her immune to law." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, during which Mom alternated between defending Vanessa's intentions and pleading for family unity. She seemed genuinely unable to understand that some problems couldn't be solved through emotional appeals and shared meals, that there were systems of accountability that existed outside family dynamics. When I finally hung up, Ryan was watching me with the kind of careful attention he gave to personnel under his command, who were dealing with difficult situations. "How do you want to handle the dinner invitation?" he asked. I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I genuinely didn't care whether my family approved of my decisions. The anxiety that had always accompanied disappointing them was gone, replaced by something cleaner and more sustainable. "We're not going," I said. "They can have their family meeting without us, and Vanessa can explain her legal situation to them herself." That afternoon, while my family gathered around the dining room table in Richmond to discuss how to solve problems they didn't understand, Ryan and I drove to Virginia Beach oceanfront. We walked along the boardwalk, bought ice cream from a vendor who recognized Ryan from previous visits, and sat on a bench watching families play in the surf. It was the most peaceful Saturday afternoon I had experienced in months, partly because I wasn't anxiously checking my phone for family drama updates, and partly because I was finally understanding the difference between family loyalty and self-respect. My phone did buzz occasionally throughout the afternoon, but I had turned off notifications for social media and text messages from family members. The only calls I answered were from Martinez, and one brief conversation with Uncle Tommy, who wanted to let me know that he supported my decision not to attend dinner, and that he was proud of how I was handling the situation. Evening came with one of those spectacular Virginia Beach sunsets that made the Atlantic look like molten gold. Ryan and I were sharing a pizza at our favorite oceanfront restaurant when my phone rang with an unknown local number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me curious enough to pick up. "Is this Petty Officer Brooks?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Detective Sarah Coleman with Richmond Police Department. I'm calling about a complaint filed by your sister, Vanessa Brooks." My stomach tightened as I gestured for Ryan to listen in on the conversation. "She's filed a harassment complaint against you, claiming that you're using your military connections to sabotage her business relationships. She says you've threatened her livelihood, and that she's afraid of retaliation from military personnel." I looked at Ryan, who was already pulling out his phone to take notes on the conversation. "Detective Coleman, I filed a formal complaint through military legal channels regarding my sister's commercial exploitation of military imagery and harassment of military personnel. Everything I've done has been through proper legal channels with appropriate documentation." There was a pause while Detective Coleman presumably reviewed whatever information she had been given. "I need to ask you some questions about your sister's claims," she said. "She says you've contacted her business partners and threatened them with legal action if they continue working with her." I explained the situation as clearly and factually as possible, outlining Vanessa's commercial use of my military service photos, the federal violations involved, and the proper military legal response that had been implemented. Detective Coleman listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. When I finished, there was another pause before she spoke. "Ma'am, Based on what you've told me, it sounds like your sister is facing the consequences of violating federal regulations regarding commercial exploitation of military personnel. That's not harassment. That's law enforcement. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, during which Detective Coleman asked for contact information for Martinez and Commander Hendricks so she could verify the military legal proceedings. She was professional and thorough, but it became clear that she understood the difference between legitimate legal consequences and harassment. After I hung up, Ryan and I sat in silence for several minutes, watching the last of the sunset fade into darkness over the Atlantic. "She actually called the police on you," Ryan said finally, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been impressed admiration for Vanessa's audacity. "She's desperate," I replied. "Her income has disappeared, she's facing demands to repay sponsorship money she's already spent, and she still doesn't understand that this situation is bigger than family dynamics." My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Tommy. "Your parents are convinced that if you just talk to Vanessa, everything can be worked out. They don't understand that she crossed legal lines that can't be uncrossed with apologies." Another text followed immediately. "Also, she showed up to dinner with a laptop and spent an hour showing everyone screenshots of legal documents she doesn't understand, trying to prove that you're the one causing her problems." The image of Vanessa sitting at my parents' dining room table, frantically clicking through screenshots of federal violation notices while Mom served pot roast and Dad tried to make sense of legal terminology he had never encountered, was almost surreal. My family was treating commercial exploitation of military personnel like a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better communication. But the most telling part of Tommy's update came in a third text. She admitted that she's made about $50,000 from content featuring your military service over the past year. Your parents seemed shocked that she was making money from posts about you. $50,000, not the $43,000 that Commander Hendricks had initially calculated, but $50,000 in revenue directly attributable to exploiting my military service. For context, that was more than my annual base housing allowance, generated by mocking my achievements and questioning my fitness for duty. Ryan read the text over my shoulder, his expression shifting into the focused intensity that appeared when he was processing information that required operational response. "She just admitted to commercial exploitation in front of witnesses," he said. "Your parents now know that she's been profiting from attacking your military career, and they heard her admit to the dollar amount involved." That evening, as we walked back along the Virginia Beach boardwalk toward our apartment, I felt something fundamental shift in how I understood my relationship with my family. For 28 years, I had been trying to earn approval from people who had never bothered to understand what I was working to achieve. I had been seeking validation from people who valued social media engagement over military service, who prioritized family peace over institutional accountability. But tonight, walking beside the husband who understood the weight of oaths and obligations, looking out at the ocean that connected our small Virginia Beach apartment to naval operations around the world, I finally understood that I had been seeking approval from the wrong people. My family could have their dinner meetings and their attempts to negotiate away federal law. Vanessa could file police complaints and create victim narratives for her remaining social media followers. But none of that changed the fact that she had attacked military personnel for profit, and that attack had triggered responses from institutions designed to protect people who serve. The lights of Norfolk Naval Base twinkled across the water as we climbed the stairs to our apartment. Somewhere in those lights, personnel were standing watch, maintaining security, ensuring that people like me could serve effectively without fear of exploitation by civilians who didn't understand or respect the sacrifices military service required. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt completely at peace with the path forward. My family might never understand the choices I had made, but the institution I served did. And that understanding was worth more than all the family dinners and emotional appeals in Richmond. Ryan unlocked our apartment door and immediately headed for his laptop, explaining that he wanted to send Commander Hendricks an update about Detective Coleman's call and Vanessa's admission of $50,000 in military-related revenue. As I watched him type with the methodical precision he brought to all professional communications, I realized that this was what institutional support looked like. Not emotional manipulation or guilt-based appeals, but systematic response to genuine threats using appropriate legal and procedural frameworks. My phone buzzed one more time before I turned it off for the night. A text from Vanessa. "I hope you're happy now. You've destroyed everything I worked for." I showed the message to Ryan, who looked up from his laptop and smiled with something that wasn't quite humor. "She still doesn't understand what happened," he said. "She thinks you destroyed her business, when actually she destroyed it herself by attacking military personnel. You just made sure the right people found out about it." Outside our apartment window, the Atlantic Ocean stretched toward the horizon, carrying ships and personnel and purposes that were larger than family drama and more important than social media engagement. Inside our apartment, my husband continued documenting federal violations with the same care he brought to protecting national interests. And for the first time in months, I went to sleep without worrying about what my family thought of my choices. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp autumn air that made Virginia Beach feel like a completely different world from the humid summer weeks we had endured. I arrived at Norfolk Naval Station with a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with routine intelligence briefings and everything to do with knowing that systematic justice was moving forward with military precision. Martinez was waiting for me in her office, surrounded by file folders and printouts that suggested the weekend had brought significant developments. Commander Hendricks sat across from her, wearing an expression of professional satisfaction that made me think of a chess master contemplating checkmate. "Petty Officer Brooks," Commander Hendricks began without preamble, "your sister's situation has evolved in ways that exceed our initial projections. The Richmond Police Department contacted us Friday evening regarding her harassment complaint against you, which provided us with additional evidence of her ongoing commercial exploitation activities." She opened her tablet and showed me screenshots I hadn't seen before. While I had been enjoying a peaceful Saturday evening at Virginia Beach, Vanessa had been documenting her own federal violations in real time through increasingly desperate social media posts. Her Instagram stories from this weekend include explicit discussions of her revenue streams from military-themed content, detailed breakdowns of which posts featuring your ceremony photo generated the most sponsorship interest, and complaints about losing income due to what she calls military bureaucracy. Martinez leaned forward, adding her own observations to Commander Hendricks' briefing. She's essentially created a comprehensive confession to commercial exploitation of military personnel. Every post where she discusses lost revenue from military content strengthens our case and provides additional evidence for federal prosecutors. But the most significant development had come from an unexpected source. The wellness company that had demanded repayment of sponsorship fees had conducted their own investigation into Vanessa's content practices, discovering that she had been systematically using military imagery and personnel without authorization for over 18 months. They've identified 47 separate posts featuring unauthorized military content, Commander Hendricks continued, including photos of other service members she obtained through social media connections and family relationships. Your case revealed a much broader pattern of commercial exploitation that extends far beyond your personal situation. The scope was staggering. While I had been focused on my own ceremony photo and military service, Vanessa had been building an entire content category around unauthorized military imagery. Photos of friends, deployment ceremonies, family members, promotion celebrations, even images she had found through social media connections to military spouses and service members. She had turned military service into a content farm, generating engagement and revenue by presenting herself as connected to military life, while simultaneously undermining the achievements and sacrifices of the personnel she was exploiting. The federal prosecutor assigned to this case is expanding the investigation, Martinez said, handing me a thick folder containing documentation I hadn't seen before. Commercial exploitation of military personnel, violation of federal trademark and imagery protections, and potentially wire fraud given the interstate nature of her revenue streams. I opened the folder and found myself looking at financial records that painted a picture of systematic commercial exploitation spanning nearly 2 years, bank deposits corresponding to social media engagement spikes, sponsorship contracts that specifically referenced military-themed content, affiliate marketing commissions tied directly to posts featuring unauthorized military imagery. Commander Hendricks showed me the most damaging evidence yet discovered. A series of emails between Vanessa and a marketing agency, where she explicitly described her strategy of using military imagery to generate emotional engagement that translated into higher sponsorship rates. In this email from 6 months ago, she writes, and I quote, "Military photos always get the best engagement because people have strong emotional reactions. I can get twice the typical response rate by posting ceremony photos or deployment content, especially if I add personal commentary that gets people debating in the comments." The calculated nature of her exploitation was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't casual cruelty or thoughtless family dynamics. She had developed a systematic business model based on extracting commercial value from military personnel and their service, without their knowledge or consent. But what made the evidence particularly damning was her documentation of deliberate emotional manipulation designed to maximize engagement around military content. Email discussions with social media consultants about the most effective ways to generate controversy around military service. Spreadsheets tracking which types of military-themed posts generated the highest revenue returns. The federal prosecutor believes this case will set important precedents for protecting military personnel from this type of commercial exploitation, Commander Hendricks said. Your sister inadvertently documented every aspect of systematic violations that prosecutors typically struggle to prove in civilian courts. Martinez pulled out another set of documents that appeared to be official correspondence. Additionally, the base commander has approved enhanced security protocols for your clearance level, effective immediately. The targeting you experienced demonstrates vulnerabilities that require institutional response to protect both you and the classified information you handle. The security enhancement meant immediate practical changes to my daily routine and significant long-term benefits for my career progression. Advanced clearance levels, access to specialized training programs, and consideration for assignments that typically required years of additional experience to qualify for. Vanessa's attacks on my military service were directly resulting in institutional investment in my career development and enhanced protection for my professional advancement. That afternoon, while I was reviewing upgraded security protocols in my office, Uncle Tommy called with updates from the family front that were both predictable and revealing. Your parents spent the weekend calling everyone they could think of, trying to find someone who could explain how to make federal investigations disappear, he said, his voice carrying the dry humor that came from watching people discover that some problems couldn't be solved through social connections and good intentions. They contacted their lawyer, who told them this was outside his expertise. They called their state representative's office, who referred them to federal authorities. They even tried to reach out to someone they know who works for the Veterans Affairs, thinking that military connections might help them understand how to negotiate with federal prosecutors. The image of my parents frantically working through their contact list, trying to find someone who could explain how to make commercial exploitation charges disappear through proper etiquette and family loyalty, would have been amusing if it weren't so emblematic of their fundamental misunderstanding of institutional accountability. Tommy continued with information that was more concerning than amusing. Vanessa has been posting almost hourly updates about her legal situation, presenting herself as a victim of military overreach and government intimidation. She's claiming that you're using your military connections to persecute her for innocent family social media posts. The victim narrative was predictable, but the potential impact on military reputation concerned me more than personal family drama. If Vanessa's version of events gained traction in civilian social media spaces, it could contribute to broader anti-military sentiment that affected all service members. But Tommy's next update suggested that Vanessa's victim strategy was backfiring in ways she hadn't anticipated. The problem with her approach is that she keeps providing specific details about how much money she made from military content, trying to prove that her business losses are real and significant. Every post where she complains about lost revenue is additional evidence of commercial exploitation. She was essentially prosecuting herself in public, documenting federal violations, while trying to generate sympathy for the consequences of those violations. That evening, Ryan and I were preparing dinner in our apartment kitchen when my phone rang, with a number I didn't recognize but with a Virginia area code that suggested local military connections. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Jennifer Walsh from the Navy Public Affairs Office, calling with information that would fundamentally change how I understood the broader impact of this situation. Petty Officer Brooks, we've been monitoring social media discussions related to your sister's posts about military service, and we wanted to brief you on some developments that affect military community interests beyond your personal case. She explained that military social media monitoring had identified Vanessa's content as part of a broader pattern of civilian influencers who were using military imagery and personnel for commercial purposes, without understanding the legal and security implications of their actions. Your case has helped us identify systematic vulnerabilities in how military personnel and their families are protected from commercial exploitation. We're implementing new protocols based on what we've learned from your sister's activities. But the most significant development involved something I hadn't considered. Military families and spouses who had seen Vanessa's content had begun coming forward with their own experiences of unauthorized commercial exploitation, creating a comprehensive picture of civilian social media practices that put military personnel at risk. We now have documentation of over 300 instances of unauthorized military imagery being used for commercial purposes by civilian influencers and content creators, Captain Walsh continued. Your sister's case provided the legal framework for addressing systematic exploitation that we previously didn't have tools to combat effectively. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, during which Captain Walsh outlined military community responses that extended far beyond individual consequences for Vanessa. New training programs for military families about social media security. Enhanced legal protections for service members whose images were used without authorization. Federal advocacy for stronger penalties against commercial exploitation of military personnel. What had started as family cruelty had evolved into institutional change that would protect thousands of current and future service members from similar exploitation. After I hung up, Ryan and I sat at our kitchen table, both of us processing the scope of what had developed from one stolen ceremony photo and 6 weeks of social media mockery. She has no idea what she actually did, Ryan said, cutting vegetables with the methodical precision he brought to all tasks. She thought she was attacking you personally, but she actually attacked military institution protections and triggered systematic defensive responses. That night, as we sat on our balcony watching the lights of Norfolk Naval Base twinkle across the water, I felt something that had been missing throughout this entire ordeal finally settle into place. Not just peace with my own choices, but understanding of their broader significance. My phone buzzed with one final notification from Vanessa's Instagram account. Instead of deleting it immediately as I had been doing, curiosity made me open it. The post was a long written statement titled, quote, "Military Intimidation and Family Destruction." In it, she outlined her version of events, portraying herself as a victim of government overreach and military persecution for innocent social media content about her own family. But buried in her victim narrative were specific details about her revenue streams, her marketing strategies, and her deliberate use of military imagery to generate commercial engagement. She was confessing to federal violations while trying to prove her innocence, documenting systematic exploitation while claiming victimization. Ryan read the post over my shoulder, occasionally shaking his head at particularly damaging admissions. "She's going to show this to federal prosecutors as evidence of her innocence," he said. "They're going to use it as additional evidence of commercial exploitation and possible obstruction of justice through public manipulation of evidence." The lights continued to twinkle across Norfolk Naval Base as another shift of personnel took over watch duties, maintaining security and readiness without regard to civilian social media drama or family dysfunction. The institution continued its mission while individual threats were identified, documented, and neutralized through appropriate legal and administrative processes. For the first time since this ordeal began, I understood that I hadn't just been defending myself against family cruelty. I had been part of institutional defense mechanisms that protected something larger and more important than individual personalities or family relationships. Vanessa would face the consequences of her choices through proper legal channels, regardless of family appeals or victim narratives. Military personnel would be better protected from similar exploitation because of the precedents established through this case. And I would continue serving with enhanced institutional support and recognition of my commitment to defending both national interests and military community welfare. The game had never been personal, even when it felt personal. It had always been institutional, and institutions played by different rules than families did. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of the Richmond Federal Courthouse, wearing my dress blue uniform and feeling calmer than I had in months. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed decades of federal proceedings, far more significant than one civilian influencer's commercial exploitation case. Ryan stood beside me, also in uniform, his commander insignia catching the light as he reviewed final documents with Martinez and Commander Hendricks. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, approached our group with the kind of confident stride that suggested this morning's proceedings were a formality rather than a battle. Ms. Brooks has agreed to a plea arrangement, Chen announced, holding a thick folder that contained the resolution of what had become a landmark case in military personnel protection. Commercial exploitation in the first degree, violation of federal trademark protections, and wire fraud across state lines. 36 months supervised probation, restitution of all documented revenue from unauthorized military content, and permanent prohibition from using military imagery or personnel in any commercial capacity. The financial restitution alone was staggering. $87,000, representing every penny Vanessa had earned from military-themed content over 18 months of systematic exploitation. Money that would be distributed among the 43 service members, whose images and service she had monetized without their knowledge or consent. But the most significant element of the plea agreement was the precedent it established for protecting military personnel from civilian commercial exploitation. Federal recognition that service members' images, ceremonies, and achievements were protected under the same frameworks that safeguarded military installations and classified information. Commander Hendricks showed me the final impact assessment that would be filed with military command structures across all service branches. This case has generated new protocols for social media monitoring, enhanced legal protections for military families, and training programs that will prevent similar exploitation from occurring in civilian influencer communities. Your sister's activities inadvertently exposed systematic vulnerabilities that we can now address proactively. As we waited for the formal plea hearing to begin, Uncle Tommy arrived wearing his Vietnam veteran's cap and the kind of satisfied expression that came from watching accountability finally catch up with people who had avoided consequences for too long. "Your parents decided not to come," he said, settling onto the wooden bench beside me. "They're still convinced this is all a misunderstanding that could have been resolved through family discussion if you had just been more flexible." The absence of my parents felt appropriate, rather than hurtful. They had spent months trying to negotiate away federal law through emotional appeals and social pressure, never understanding that some institutions operated according to principles that existed outside family dynamics and personal relationships. At precisely 10:30, we were called into the courtroom where Federal Judge Patricia Morrison presided over proceedings with the kind of efficient dignity that made civilian drama seem petty and inconsequential. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking smaller and more subdued than I had ever seen her. Gone was the confident social media persona, replaced by someone who finally understood that consequences existed beyond losing followers or sponsorship deals. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed man who specialized in federal commercial violations, had clearly explained the realities of her situation in terms that even her optimistic assumptions about family loyalty couldn't overcome. Judge Morrison reviewed the plea agreement with methodical thoroughness, ensuring that Vanessa understood every aspect of her obligations and restrictions. The supervised probation meant regular check-ins with federal authorities. The restitution payments meant liquidating assets and returning money she had already spent. The prohibition on military-themed content meant rebuilding her entire social media strategy around topics that didn't exploit service members. When Judge Morrison asked if she understood the terms of the agreement, Vanessa's response was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." The formal sentencing took less than 20 minutes. 3 years of supervised federal probation, $87,000 in restitution payments, community service hours to be completed through veterans, organizations under federal supervision, permanent restriction from commercial use of military imagery, personnel, or service-related content. But Judge Morrison's closing statement carried weight that extended far beyond individual punishment. "This case represents systematic exploitation of military personnel by civilian commercial interests," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom with authority that made every word feel significant. "The defendant's actions demonstrate the need for enhanced federal protections for service members whose sacrifices should not be monetized by individuals seeking social media engagement and commercial profit." As we left the courthouse walking down the steps into crisp October sunlight, I felt something fundamental settle into place that had been unsettled for months. Not triumph or revenge, but simple justice administered through proper institutional channels according to established legal frameworks. Ryan's phone buzzed with a call from Captain Walsh at Navy Public Affairs, who wanted to brief him on the broader military community response to the case resolution. The precedent established today is already being cited in 12 other federal investigations involving civilian exploitation of military personnel, she said, her voice carrying through the phone speaker as we walked toward our car. This case has provided legal framework for protecting service members that we've needed for years but never had the documentation to establish. That afternoon, as we drove back to Virginia Beach along familiar highways that connected Richmond's civilian world to Norfolk's military reality, I received a text message that I had been expecting but wasn't sure how to process. It was from Vanessa. "I hope you're satisfied with destroying my life. Everything I worked for is gone because you couldn't handle a little teasing." I showed the message to Ryan, who read it while stopped at a traffic light, and shook his head with something between amazement and professional admiration for her complete failure to understand what had actually happened. "She still thinks this was about family dynamics and hurt feelings," he said. "She has no idea she attacked federal institutions and triggered systematic defensive responses that had nothing to do with personal relationships." Instead of responding to her message, I deleted it and turned off my phone notifications. Whatever narrative she was constructing about victimization and family betrayal was no longer relevant to anything that mattered. That evening, we stood on our apartment balcony watching the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange that made the water look like liquid metal. The lights of Norfolk Naval Base began to twinkle in the distance as evening watch rotations took over security duties that continued regardless of civilian drama or family dysfunction. My phone rang once more with a call from Martinez, who wanted to provide final case closure information. "The federal prosecutor's office is using your case as a template for military personnel protection legislation that's being introduced in Congress next session," she said. "Enhanced penalties for commercial exploitation of service members, expanded federal jurisdiction over civilian attacks on military personnel, and increased funding for military family social media security programs." After I hung up, Ryan and I sat together in comfortable silence, watching naval vessels move slowly across the horizon toward purposes and destinations that were larger than individual personalities and more important than social media engagement. 6 months ago, I had been trying to preserve family relationships with people who were willing to sacrifice my career and reputation for entertainment value. Tonight, I understood that I had been seeking approval from individuals who didn't comprehend the weight of institutional service or the significance of oaths taken on behalf of something greater than personal interests. My phone buzzed with one final message, this time from Uncle Tommy. "Proud of you for standing up for what matters and letting institutions handle institutional threats. Some battles are bigger than family, and you chose the right side." The lights continued to move across Norfolk Naval Base as personnel maintained readiness and security without regard to civilian opinions or family pressure. The institution continued its mission while individual threats were identified, processed, and neutralized through appropriate legal and administrative channels. For the first time since receiving my Navy Achievement Medal, I felt genuinely proud of my service and confident in my commitment to defending principles that existed outside personal relationships and family dynamics. Not because my family finally understood or approved of my choices, but because I had learned to value institutional purpose over individual approval. Vanessa would spend the next 3 years rebuilding her life according to federal supervision requirements, learning that some consequences couldn't be negotiated away through emotional manipulation or victim narratives. Military personnel would be better protected from commercial exploitation because of precedents established through systematic legal response rather than family intervention, and I would continue serving with enhanced institutional support and recognition of my commitment to defending both national interests and military community welfare, regardless of civilian understanding or family approval. The game had never been personal, even when it felt personal. It had always been about protecting institutions and principles that were larger than individual personalities, and more important than social media metrics. As the last light faded from the Atlantic horizon, and Norfolk Naval Base settled into its evening rhythm of watchful security, Ryan and I went inside our apartment, finally understanding that we had been defending the right things in the right ways, through proper channels that achieved lasting results. The military protected its own according to established protocols and federal law, not family loyalty or emotional appeals. And sometimes that protection required choosing institutional accountability over personal relationships, federal justice over family harmony, and systematic consequences over comfortable illusions. 3 years later, when Vanessa completed her supervised probation and community service requirements at veterans organizations, she would understand military service differently than she had when this started. But by then, enhanced federal protections for military personnel would be preventing hundreds of similar exploitation cases. And I would be serving at a security clearance level that reflected institutional trust rather than family approval. Some battles end with apologies and reconciliation. Others end with systematic change that protects people who serve principles larger than themselves. This had been the latter type of battle, and it had been won according to military precision rather than civilian emotion. The lights of Norfolk Naval Base twinkled steadily across the water, unchanged by family drama, but strengthened by institutional response to threats against the people who maintained those lights through service that transcended personal relationships and individual understanding. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.